On the left, Mike Kinsley. On the right, Pat Buchanan. Tonight, as the world turns, in the crossfire, former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger.
Good evening and welcome to Crossfire. The Red Army rolled into Azerbaijan this week to crush an incipient coup d'etat by popular forces against the local communist regime. So said the Soviet defense minister today. The comment sends a hard signal about the limits of Moscow's tolerance to Lithuania, the secessionist Baltic province which Mikhail Gorbachev has tried to talk out of breaking away from Mother Russia. In East Europe, the campaign to drive all communists from power rages on. While in East Germany, the demand is growing for German reunification now. Tonight, will Gorbachev use the Red Army to hold Germany and to keep his country intact? And just how much longer does he have? Michael?
Dr. Kissinger, there's a pretty hot debate going on at the moment about the great man theory of history. Now, that's not a reference to you, that's a reference to Mikhail Gorbachev. Time magazine said he was the man of the decade. A lot of people, such as Pat here, were outraged by that. Now, is Gorbachev the essential man of these historical changes going on, or is he just riding a historical roller coaster that's really beyond his control?
I think that Gorbachev's contribution has been to let the genie out of the bottle. I don't think he knows how to shape it. And I don't know whether he knew he was letting the genie out of the bottle. I suspect that he didn't. I suspect that he thought that with a little tinkering here and there, the communist system as he had known it and through which he had risen would be revitalized.
If you had been advising Time magazine, would you have put Mikhail Gorbachev on the cover as man of the decade or Ronald Reagan as man of the decade?
I probably would have put Reagan on the cover in terms of the difference he made. Mm-hmm. Not necessarily in terms of the appeal he's had around the world.
Mm-hmm. Well, now President Bush has pretty clearly cast his vote with Gorbachev on the question of is Gorbachev responsible for these changes, or is he just riding along? Is he the essential man? The Bush administration seems to think he's pretty essential, and they're doing everything they can within reason to help him out, including supporting things like the crushing of the movement in Azerbaijan, which they might not be so eager to do otherwise. Is this the right thing to do, or should they be withdrawing from Gorbachev now, distancing themselves?
I don't think they should withdraw from Gorbachev, and I don't think they should stake their policy on Gorbachev. I think it is a mistake to assume, and also dangerous to assume, that a single individual is responsible for all the changes, because if this is true, then we're building on sand, because that implies that no other Soviet leader would assess the Soviet necessities the same way Gorbachev does. I believe that what has brought about these changes is a courageous analysis by Gorbachev of necessities, part of which we had a hand in creating. And it isn't just, as is often implied in our media, that Gorbachev had a conversion on the road to Damascus.
But it also isn't, as sometimes implied in some of our right-wing media, that if anyone out of the Moscow phone book had been the head of the Soviet Union, it all would have turned out exactly the same way.
I think it is highly probable that Gorbachev went further and more courageously than anyone else might have. That the road on which they must travel, I think, is imposed on them by what Marxists call objective necessity. And if it isn't, we're in trouble, because Gorbachev isn't going to live forever.
Dr. Kissinger, it appears that Gorbachev will not use the Red Army to keep any of the 6 satellite countries or regimes in power, or to hold them within the Soviet orbit. Do you think that's correct, or would he use the Red Army to keep East Germany away from West Germany?
I tell you, if you had asked me that question a year ago, I would have said he'll use the Red Army. Under present circumstances, I think it's extremely unlikely that he'll use the Red Army, because things have gone so far that I do not believe he can use the Red Army in any one East European country alone, that he'd have to tackle all of them if he wanted to repress. And secondly, he has such a stake now in opinion in Western Europe that if he used the Red Army in Eastern Germany, he'd lose everything he's built in East Germany.
That brings us to the Soviet Union itself, which is an internal empire. He has used the Red Army to hold Azerbaijan. We heard just today that the defense minister says it was almost a coup d'etat against the communist regime there. Do you think he will use the Red Army to hold Lithuania, Latvia, or Estonia, or will he let them go if they proceed as they have, legally and by votes rather than national uprisings?
I think there is a chance, if they go through stages, and if they permit some Soviet defense military presence like a base, that he might let them go. But I think it's a 50-50 proposition, because once the principle is established that parts of the empire can break away, one has to remember that nearly 50% of the empire is non-Russian.
If he had used the Red Army in Eastern Europe, there clearly would have been outrage in the West. If he used the Red Army in Lithuania, Latvia, there would probably be outrage in the West. He has used it in Azerbaijan, and there is virtually no outrage in the West. Now, is that a correct assessment? Is the apparent Western consensus that reflected in that reality, is that the correct attitude?
My impression is that most Western countries are looking for an excuse not to be outraged.
Should they be outraged?
No, but they also shouldn't endorse it.
But there is in your mind a legitimate difference between use of force to suppress independence of Azerbaijan and use of force to suppress independence of Lithuania.
I don't like the use of force to suppress anybody personally. Right. I think the issue is, do we promote the breakup of the Soviet Empire, putting aside the Baltic states, which we have never recognized, whose annexation we've never recognized, and where to recognize them at this moment would be an absurdity. I would not go out of my way to harass the Soviet Union, but I would also not give them an assurance ahead of time, because that way we can at least moderate what they might do.
Let's turn to Germany, Dr. Kissinger. Why is the United States putting conditions on German reunification when it is quite clear reunification is A, inevitable, and B, the German people, West and East, want it, and C, we have been behind it for decades?
There is the concern that we discussed earlier, that a too rapid unification of Germany, or maybe any unification of Germany, would undermine the position of Gorbachev. I don't accept that proposition. I do not accept the proposition that Gorbachev can tell us, you have to keep Germany divided, in return for which I stay in office. Because it runs counter not only to what we have said for decades, but also to our national interest, and in the long term even to the Soviet national interest.
Let me follow up on that. As you know, you were the architect, or one of the American architects, of the Helsinki Agreement of 1975. As you know, at the end of World War II, the Germans, by the Soviets and Polish and Czech communists, were stripped of Pomerania, East Prussia, Silesia, the Sudetenland, 16 million Germans expelled, millions died. The line was set at the Oder-Neisse line. That is that's the eastern border of East Germany. Do you think a united Germany should accept that and sign on to that, or do they have a right to claim some of those historic German territories in the East that I just mentioned?
I think they should accept it, because if the Germans reopen the issue of the borders, the impact of what will look like German revanchism on the rest of Europe would be too serious.
Let me follow up on that.
You're obsessed. Go ahead.
The
only thing that gives me frights about German reunification is Pat's enthusiasm for it. Now you're going after the Sudetenland.
No, I'm in favor of reunification.
Yes, I understand.
Strongly in favor of reunification, but I think that the price the Germans have to pay for it is to accept the Oder-Neisse line.
My follow-up is this. Kohl's party obviously is not signing on to that, because the German right in Bavaria and elsewhere has a tremendous issue in the lost territories in the East. Now, I mean, if Kohl accepts what you suggested he should, it seems to me he opens his party up for tremendous attrition on its right wing.
I am in favor of their accepting it before unification. Now, at the timing at which they accept it, that is obviously open. I could imagine the formal legal position of the West German governing party is that since there's no united Germany, they don't have to face that issue, and they want to save it for a peace conference. The real issue is the one you mentioned, that they don't want to lose votes to the right-wing nationalists in next year's election. I would think that the process that should be followed is to have the German Confederation that Kohl has proposed, that then charge the German Confederation with negotiating a peace treaty, in the course of which they should accept the ordinance.
Dr. Kissinger, you said that now that the Cold War is ending, we're moving back to a sort of a 19th century great power game sort of world politics. But a lot of people are wondering, including Pat once again, why do we have to play this great power game if the values we cherish aren't at stake? Why do we need to have influence over Europe if in any event Europe is going to be free and democratic and open to our trade? In other words, what is the point of being a great power in a post-Cold War world?
No, we don't have to have influence over Europe in order to be a great power. Twice in this century, the United States went to war in order to prevent Eurasia from falling under the domination of a single country. We have a national interest in preventing Eurasia from being dominated by one great power because the resources of it would be so much larger than ours.
Even if it's a great power that completely shares our values, democracy, freedom, open markets, and so on?
Yeah, regrettably, that is my view.
Okay, we have to take a break. When we come back, we'll turn to China and yesterday's surprise Senate vote upholding President Bush's veto of a bill guaranteeing that Chinese students in the United States won't get sent back when their visas expire.
In a world that's put such a premium on time, it may seem shocking that these craftsmen have devoted so much time to the leisure of just 2 people. But if you're one of them, you'll discover not a moment has been wasted. Announcing America's premium handcrafted car, the Reatta by Buick. Handcrafted luxury for 2.
Your home is really worth, how much it means to you. When it comes time to buy or sell, no one knows more or cares more about the American home than Better Homes and Gardens.
You know the National Rifle Association protects your Second Amendment freedoms, but did you know we also train Olympic shooters, teach firearms and hunting safety to hundreds of thousands of Americans, host competitive shooting events nationwide, train thousands of law enforcement officers, and support junior firearms and safety clubs all over America. That's the real NRA. I'm proud of it.
Headline news hits the major points of the story and gives you the headlines one after the other.
Who wants to hear about stuff that's going on, that's been going on, when you can see stuff that's happening all over the world and just learn.
We prefer to watch headline news.
Welcome back to Crossfire. We're talking to Dr. Henry Kissinger, the former Secretary of State, whose most notable foreign policy accomplishment was probably the opening of American relations with China in 1971. Those relations hit a low ebb after the massacre of students protesting for democracy in Tiananmen Square last June. Dr. Kissinger has been a strong voice urging that relations not be derailed by this episode. In a controversial column last July, he wrote, quote, "No government in the world would have tolerated having its main square of its capital occupied for 8 weeks," unquote, although he also criticized the government's violent methods. The Bush administration seems to share Dr. Kissinger's views. There have been 2 high-level delegations to Beijing since the massacre, a secret one in July and a public one in December. And Mr. Bush vetoed a bill guaranteeing that Chinese students here won't be deported to China when their visas expire, a veto the Senate upheld yesterday. Let me ask you about that veto. Mr. Bush argued that this bill was unnecessary because he was offering the exact same protections to these students administratively. But in that case, in terms of protecting the students, the veto was also unnecessary. Wasn't this action by the president just what most congressmen took it to be, which was an act of kowtowing to China?
No. First of all, let me make clear what I did say. I didn't also criticize the violent methods. In the very next sentence to the one you quoted, I pointed out that I was shocked by the methods as well as by the Stalin-type purges.
If we're going to get into that article, let me just derail this conversation briefly. I did reread the whole thing when I read that you were complaining about the treatment. I don't see how anyone reading this article could help but conclude that your main purpose, although you did say both those things, yes, no one would tolerate it, yes, they would crack down, that your main purpose was to say this is not as big a deal, this massacre, as people take it for.
The main purpose of the article.
TV could not, by its nature, supply the historical or political context.
The main purpose.
What happened in Beijing was not a simple morality play.
Correct.
Things like that.
The main purpose of the article was to warn against sanctions against China. That was clearly the main purpose of the article, because I think a good relationship with China is important for American national security, and I think American national security is also an objective. So, but to answer your previous question, I don't think it was kowtowing at all. I think the president protected the students, but he did not want any unnecessary confrontation with the Chinese.
A lot of people who aren't foreign policy experts just find it hard to understand why we're invading Panama on the one hand because of a petty drug dealer, while at the same time we're toasting the massacre, the people who committed the massacre in Tiananmen Square. Now, is that naive? Does practical geopolitics really require that kind of moral dissonance?
I think practical geopolitics is what contributes to assuring the survival of nations. And you can always have a judgment of whether any particular measure is necessary. I think toasting the Chinese leaders is not the essence of the Bush foreign policy. The essence of the Bush foreign policy is not to break off the dialogue with a leadership that has been responsible for major economic reforms that produce this political upheaval, and which, if continued, is likely to lead to political pluralism.
Dr. Kissler, as we know from the Bitburg episode, for example, symbols are very, very important. What did you think when Scowcroft got over there to Beijing and got up and, in effect, toasted Deng Xiaoping and the American and Chinese governments and pretty much disparaged American and Chinese critics, the American critics being a lot of conservatives in the United States?
Oh, look, Scowcroft is a close friend of mine. I think he's a great public servant. He and I worked together for 10 years in various capacities, and I don't want to get into a position here of second-guessing every move he made when I don't know the circumstances that that produced it.
All right, let me ask you
as a general proposition, I would say it's we don't have to endorse what the Chinese did, and I'm sure it was not intended as an endorsement.
Right. You got a lot of heat. You got a lot of heat yourself, because Eagleburger and Scowcroft, on that famous Rosencrantz and Guildenstern mission, if you will, were both former employees of Kissinger Associates. They made 2 trips over there. Do you think that, I mean, that the suggestion, of course, and you got a lot of heat because people say, well, these are just Henry Kissinger's associates, and they're going over there, they had business there, etc. Is it, you think that all that was by accident?
No, I think it's an outrage. These people, we have worked together for 10 years, in government and out of government. I have no business interests that are in the slightest served by their mission. I didn't know that they were going on the mission. The first mission I never knew about until I read it in the newspaper. The second mission I knew about an hour before they left.
Where's the wall?
The suggestion that Eagleburger and Scowcroft would conduct national policy on which they are sent by the United States for some nebulous financial benefit to my activities, it's an outrage.
But what?
I spent 6 years after I left office not engaged in any commercial activities. I don't take foreign governments as clients. I don't do any lobbying, and I really resent this constant
But is the Wall Street Journal incorrect in saying that you did have business interests that were threatened and, in fact, put on hold by the Tiananmen Square massacre, and that you do have, not that this necessarily that you do have business interests that would profit from a restoring of normal relations with China?
Absolutely not.
That's completely false.
It is substantially false. I suspended these any actions that raise a question of where the Chinese government might benefit. I suspended them, not anybody else.
Well, every business and every American business contract in China was suspended.
Almost 95% of American businesses continued in China unchanged.
So have you unsuspended? Wait, let me ask, have you unsuspended them? They're still suspended, but why, if you're urging that we renew?
Because precisely to prevent smart Alex from creating the impression that my opinions are for sale, and because I have my opinions are based on my perception of the national interest.
We'll take a break right now, and when we come back, we'll take up the issue of Panama.
Our McDonald's was between school and home. Mom would say, "Don't stop, you'll spoil your appetite." But one blustery afternoon, there it was, McDonald's, glowing, inviting us.
Come on, let's go.
Yes, I would spoil my appetite with that hot, beefy burger in my cold little hands. Then I got home.
Hey, look what I got.
Nailed. Dad had brought McDonald's for dinner. To this day, I still can't pass up those big, beefy burgers.
When someone needs a helping hand, don't let minor arthritis pain get in the way. Take Arthritis Pain Formula. It has a maximum dosage of aspirin, the pain reliever doctors recommend most. Arthritis Pain Formula. Maximum aspirin, maximum strength relief.
You fly in, the buildings you live and work in, the cars you drive. We've even been to the moon. In all we do, in buildings, aerospace, and automobiles, we're working together, sharing what we know, reaching toward a single goal. United Technologies.
Welcome back. Dr. Kissinger, Secretary Baker, for a long time, repeatedly denied publicly that he had sent the first Scowcroft mission to China. And a lot of press said, well, it was a flat-out lie. What I want to ask you as former Secretary of State, are there occasions on which a Secretary of State has, if you will, an inherent right to lie, to defend the national security, to protect a policy, to protect something the President wants to keep secret, and win?
I think under present conditions it's a very dangerous course to take. I have sympathy for the position in which Secretary Baker found himself. There are missions, I don't know what I would have done. I know what I would have done before my secret mission to China. If I had been asked, I probably would have lied, because I thought it was essential to protect it. One then has to decide in each case, is this mission important enough to protect? It should be a highly unusual event when it occurs.
Senator Dole has urged a slicing of 5% from our major foreign aid recipients, including most notably Israel, in order to give money to Eastern Europe. Do you endorse that idea?
Well, I favor the increasing aid program. I favor giving the President greater flexibility. I do not favor cutting from our major
Giving
recipients.
President greater flexibility, but not cutting any of these big recipients who are getting it now.
I would be prepared to increase the aid program.
All right, Dr. Kissinger, how long do you give Gorbachev? Economic crisis, nationalities crisis?
I think, you know, as an outsider, it looks like a 50-50 proposition, but my basic view is we shouldn't be so obsessed with Gorbachev's survival one way or the other.
Would you like a chance to endorse the invasion of Panama? I'm sure...
I strongly support the invasion of Panama. I'm uneasy about trying Noriega in America.
Okay, thank you.
Dr. Kissinger, thank you very much for coming over. Michael and I will be back with final words in a moment.
Good evening, I'm Susan Rook. CNN's Prime News is next. We'll have the latest information on the crash of the Colombian jetliner. Also, survivors and their families tell their stories. Lawyers for Manuel Noriega try a novel strategy today during Noriega's bond hearing, and Neil Bush, the president's son, vows to fight as the federal government levels new accusations in the savings and loan scandal. All this and more in CNN's Prime News next.
In a world that's put such a premium on time, seem shocking that these craftsmen have devoted so much time to the leisure of just 2 people. But if you're one of them, you'll discover not a moment has been wasted. Announcing America's premium handcrafted car, the Riata by Buick. Handcrafted luxury for 2.
Was it because the tables were set with Rosenthal china, or that the swordfish was steamed with fresh dill? Was it the string quartet, or world-class service? No one can say which of the thousands of details conspired to create such a perfectly good time. But so long as there are those dedicated to pursuing pleasure, Holland America remains intent on providing it.
Call now and you can have 13 weeks of the Wall Street Journal and this valuable 120-page guide to understanding money and markets. That's 13 weeks of the Journal for the news and ideas you need every business day. And this guide free, which tells you everything you want to know about money and markets, now for only $34. Call toll-free 800-638-9600. Today's Wall Street Journal. Faster, tougher, smarter. Call 800-638-9600 now.
Come and explore one of Atlanta's biggest stories. The studios of CNN and Headline News. The CNN Studio Tour. For more information, call 404-827-2400.
Tomorrow night on Capitol Gang, Jesse Jackson comes to the fore in Washington, D.C. And is George Bush invincible after his victory on China on the Hill? That's tomorrow night at 7 p.m. right here on CNN.
Pat, you know, as I was saying to Dr. Kissinger, the only thing that gives me pause about German reunification is your enthusiasm for it. I don't think the word Sudetenland has appeared in a public policy discussion in America for decades. Do you actually think the Germans should not only reunify, but get all that land back?
No, what I'm saying is, Michael, what you don't understand, if you'd study the history of World War II, there's enormous animosity in Germany and a desire for the restoration of a lot of these lands, and this is a political problem people have to take up.
Do you think they should have it?
No, I agree with Henry Kissinger.
From the left, I'm Mike Kinsley. Good night for Crossfire, and thank goodness for that.
From the right, Pat Buchanan. Join us Monday night for another edition of Crossfire.